What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, we are going to be a little bit dangerous. We are going to cover Thor the God Butcher. Now, here's the deal. I did a rundown episode on this once before where it was like Thor versus Galactus, and it was really fun because that's what we get. You know, it's actually the later part of this story. I think it's the second half. I want to say it's God Bomb where we end up getting that. But really, everything from like Thor God of Thunder #1 all the way up to like number 9 or number 10, I think. It might even be 12. I can't remember exactly how many issues off the top of my head. It's all one cohesive story. It's all just like one great big story. But for those of you guys who are reading Jane Foster Thor, this is really where Jason Aaron's run kicks off. Now, Jane Foster won't become Thor for quite some time. We actually focus almost exclusively on Odin's son. But here's the other funny thing too. I've already recorded the origin of Gorr the God Butcher, and I'm probably going to release that after this video comes out. So you guys are going to watch this video, then watch the origin of Gorr, and then in the origin of Gorr, I'm going to act like this video hasn't been made. It's gonna be kind of a weird scenario, but the fact remains here that Thor the God Butcher is really one of the greatest stories ever told when it comes to the character of Thor. I mean, that's just the way it is. It's so incredibly good because in my mind, it really reinvigorates and really revitalizes Thor. Now, once the movie Ragnarok comes out, we'll actually start all the way back with Thor Ragnarok and then get into J. Michael Straczynski's run and then Matt Fraction's run, which basically covers everything leading up to this particular story. So it'll be just one great big cohesive playlist with something like 30 videos or 40 videos by the time we get done with it, but it will be pretty cool in terms of how it all comes together. That includes like Fear itself and the tie-ins and all that kind of stuff, because Fear itself is really, really good. So with Thor the God Butcher, the great thing is that we basically join up with 3 different generations of Thor. Now, the way that Jason Aaron does it, it paces out and it makes perfect sense when I was going through it. It wasn't convoluted, it wasn't difficult to understand, not at all, because it tells one cohesive story over 3 generations. One part, or I guess the part that we pick up with, is in 893 AD. Now, back when it came to Thor in the modern day, his stories are pretty straightforward, but really writers just kind of pick and choose what they use from like the early days of Thor. You can really just kind of throw anything in there. I mean, we've seen stories that have been kind of thrown in with Uncanny Avengers, for example, where Thor fought Apocalypse. When Thor was fighting Apocalypse, because of the fact that the weapon that he had at the time, because he wasn't worthy to wield Mjolnir yet, wield his hammer, because his axe Jarnbjorn was not powerful enough to defeat Apocalypse, he in turn had the axe magically enchanted so that it could defeat Apocalypse. And that was the explanation going forward for why the axe of Thor has a magical enchantment on it, why it's so much more powerful than any other axe, because it needed to be in order to defeat Apocalypse. These are the kind of things that writers use in order to add things in there, because for years and years and years, the axe, the one that we'll see him using in this story, it was really just an axe that was there. Like, it was just a weapon that he used, and we really didn't know the basis behind it. We didn't know why it was so capable. It just was. And so that story of Uncanny Avengers offered that explanation. Now, the cool thing is that Thor showing up really in this town on the western coast of Iceland is designed to show us that there are a myriad of gods that exist out there in the realm of Marvel Comics. Now, this is kind of a wholesale rework by Jason Aaron. He's not like rebooting the god mythology in Marvel Comics, not at all. He's actually adding in new information. And the reason why I say that is because when it comes to gods in Marvel, there are gods and then there are cosmic entities, and they're 2 distinctly different things. Cosmic entities represent an aspect of the universe. So like, you know, eternity represents time, infinity represents space, the living tribunal is basically the judge of the multiverse, the one above all created everything. And then from there, you've got like Master Order and Lord Chaos. Master Order represents absolute order in the universe. Lord Chaos represents absolute chaos in the universe, and they have to exist in balance in order for there to be chaos and order, and the in-betweener represents that balance. There are a lot of different, you know, representations of what the different entities mean. But in terms of gods, you have the Greek gods of Olympus, you have the Asgardian gods of Norse mythology, you have the Sky Fathers, which are just kind of like these head gods of all these different religions that exist out there, Judeo-Christianity, more or less, Yahweh, you have Vishnu, you have all these different gods that exist out there. But for years, that's really all there was. It was just modern Greek mythology and modern Roman mythology, which is just kind of a reworking of Greek mythology. You had existing religions from around the world, and the gods represented in comic books. What Jason Aaron does is he expands that, and he says other planets and other races have their own gods, and those gods are just as real as Thor. And so again, it's really kind of cool because it gives us this perspective perspective on how it all comes together. The issue with this is that someone's been traveling around and someone's been killing them all. Now, of course, again, this takes place in the past in 893 AD. And so with someone running around and killing all these gods, well, then from there, it's just a mission of Thor to find out who that person is. Now, from here, we jump to the present day and we actually pick up on a place called the planet Endigar. Now, the planet Endigar will be very, very similar to the planet that belongs to Gorr the God Butcher. And in fact, this was explicitly designed by Jason Aaron himself to give us this kind of parallel between how things could have been for Gorr and how things turned out to be for Gorr. And of course, we'll find more about that in our video on the origin of the God Butcher himself. But the fact remains here that this is really Thor just kind of being depicted as a character who very much hears the prayers of every living being out there. Now, this is also kind of a new introduction for Jason Aaron because Thor historically wasn't really a god that like heard the prayers of mortals. I mean, he would deal with mortals, he would fight in conflicts to protect mortals, different things like that. And it was more or less just like a generally accepted thing that had happened every once in a while. But it wasn't like it was a guaranteed in stone, yes, Thor hears the prayers of all mortals, no matter where they are in the universe. It wasn't like it is now. But Jason Aaron is throwing this in here in order to give us a perspective of where Thor stands in relation to all the other gods, telling us that gods everywhere hear the prayers. Sometimes they'll answer, sometimes they won't. It really just depends on what that god's motivation are, what their motivation is. If they're a god of destruction, they will not answer the prayers of a society that's being destroyed. But if they're a god of life, then they will answer the prayers of a society that's being destroyed because they exist to preserve life. So again, what we end up doing is we end up picking up with one of the members of this race on this planet who's basically saying, look, we prayed to our gods and our gods never answered. Well, the belief of Thor and the knowledge of Thor is that because there are gods out there and because the gods of these planets would respond to their denizens, if they're not, then it means that the gods are derelict in their duty, or it means that something is wrong. And so what he does is he actually travels to the realm of the lords of Endigar, the lords, or I guess the gods of this particular planet, only to find out that they're all dead, that they've all been slaughtered. Somebody went through and just killed every single one of them. And this is a huge thing because we're talking about beings, we don't know what their power is, but we can guarantee that they have your like standard run-of-the-mill Thor abilities, super strength, endurance, longevity, so on and so forth. And so for someone to walk into a chamber of these things and kill them all would be tantamount to somebody walking into Asgard and killing everyone. Like, that's something that just is inconceivable. We can't imagine of a scenario where a singular being would walk into Asgard and kill everyone, shy of someone who could just warp reality on a universal scale. So again, this is a really crazy scenario, but from here, we jump to several millennia into the future to what's left of Asgard. Effectively, everybody in Asgard's gone, and the only person left is old King Thor. For those of you guys who are reading or who have been reading Jane Foster Thor, one of the things you'll notice about old King Thor is that his arm is missing. And in fact, this is a question that I've received time and time again, and I believed I had answered it, but I may not have. In the inaugural story, when Jane Foster became Thor, Jason Aaron basically wrote a circumstance whereby Odin's son lost his arm, and he basically used the Destroyer armor as a replacement arm. What this several millennia in the future, this takes place well after the events of the modern day Thor, and it seems like this is basically the future version of the Thor that we're used to. He lost his arm, but he is the sole survivor of Asgard. We don't know exactly what it is that happened there, or at least at the moment we don't. It's actually explained in Loki, Agent of Asgard, but we don't know exactly what it is that happened there. All we know is that Asgard has been completely overrun by these black serpents, these black forces of Gorr the God Butcher. And so again, it presents a very bleak future. It presents a very bleak outcome in the sense that this is basically a multi-generational fight. In the past, 893 AD, Thor encountered God Butcher for the very first time. In the present day, he's trying to track him back down. And in the future, Gorr appears to have won. And so it's a really cool scenario because then what Jason Aaron does for the rest of the story is he connects the dots. He says if Thor met, Gorr for the first time in the past, and then he's tracking him down again in the present and seems to have lost in the future, then how do we get from A to B to C? And it's so cool to see it unfold. It's so cool to see it happen because what Thor does is he continues his journey to basically travel around. Back in the past in 893 AD, he continues his journey to try to track down this person who has basically killed these gods, which of course leads him into a direct conflict with Gorr the God Butcher. Now, the important thing to notice here is that again, with this taking place in the past, Thor's never faced anyone like this before. Thor's never faced anyone like Gorr. Gorr has this Necrosword that basically allows him to kill gods. Now, it is the source of his power, but the real benefit of the Necrosword is that it is a weapon of the gods. And so it would be like trying to fight Superman with a steel sword versus trying to fight Superman with a kryptonite sword. One is going to work and one is not. The Necrosword basically allows Gorr to kill gods. It's a weapon for God to kill a god, and it was previously owned by gods. Of course, we'll learn more about that in the origin of Gorr itself. But the fact remains here that with Thor facing off against Gorr, this is a hitherto unrivaled situation. Thor's never dealt with anything like this, a person who just cannot be stopped, cannot be reasoned with. All he wants to do is just kill Thor. Now, the cool thing about this is that Gorr has like some amazing dialogue in this story, and that's really one of the reasons why readers love him so much, is because he's got such amazing dialogue. You know, he was like, look, you know, I fought so many gods. I fought gods of war. Are you a god of war? Because I've fought and I've killed so many of them. I fought gods of wrath. I fought all these different gods and I've killed them all. You will be no different. Not only that, Thor, of course, charging into battle, you know, for Asgard. I'm Thor, god of thunder of Asgard. What this does is it turns Gorr onto the idea that he can basically begin the process of killing even more gods by invading Asgard. So again, this is a really cool scenario, because what it does is it gives us this conflict between two beings who have never met before, but who seem to be virtually equal in power. Now, of course, jumping back to the modern day, this is really when Thor begins to realize what it is that's going on. By going through this temple, you know, this realm where these gods have effectively been killed, he's been hearkening back on his memories of conflicting with Gorr. And this is when he realizes that he previously believed he had killed Gorr, only to find out that Gorr is still very much alive. And so again, this is interesting because what it does is it continues to sort of fill in the gaps. It continues to sort of let us know what's going on. Of course, finding the gods of this planet having been killed, Thor travels to a place called Omnipotent City. Now, Omnipotent City is new. Jason Aaron invented this. This is a place that never existed before. And this is why I say he's doing this wholesale revamping of sorts when it comes to the god mythology in Marvel Comics, because previously the only real form of meeting among the gods, so to speak, was the Skyfathers. That was it. You know, the leaders of these various godly pantheons. And that's really all there was. But with Omnipotent City, what it does is it basically creates a central hub of information. And within Omnipotent City is basically knowledge on everything about everything. Now, Thor's not looking to learn everything that there is. Instead, this is Jason Aaron basically saying this library is filled with like the stories, the achievements, all these different things of every god in existence. And so what Thor begins to do is travel around to every single realm where these gods are supposed to exist, to every planet where these gods reside, to every moon, the whole 9 yards. And all he finds is dead god after dead god. They have all been butchered. Every last one of them have been killed, whether it's these massive gods, whether it's these small gods, whether they're tree nymphs, you know, whether they're gods of destruction, gods of war, it doesn't matter. Every single one of them has been completely destroyed and completely obliterated. And so having found that all these gods have been completely obliterated, what Thor does is he reflects back on the final battle that he had with Gorr in the past and recalls the cave, the base of operations, so to speak, that Gorr was operating out of. And so traveling back to this location where he intends to confront Gorr again, he actually comes into contact for the first time with a guy by the name of Shadrach, I think it is. Now, this is kind of cool because Shadrach's just like a god of wine. And it's really interesting to see how like Jason Aaron is very much invoking like this Greek mythological godly pantheon and just kind of applying it to Marvel and then spreading it throughout the universe. Like there's gods of wine, there's gods of dancing, there's gods of the harvest, gods of the hunt, gods of the sun, so on and so forth. It's really cool to kind of see this expanded out into the realm of Marvel Comics and expanded to the universe. But the issue here is that Shadrach basically says, look, the reason why all of this is being done is because of what you did to Gorr the last time you guys had met, the last time you guys had fought. Now, again, this is Jason Aaron continuing to kind of expand on this. Jason Aaron continuing to essentially go through and add the narrative to this story that will increase the relationship between Gorr and Thor himself. And the reason why is because what Thor does in the modern day is he takes Shadrach to Omnipotent City with the goal of basically saying, look, let's see if we can't find this realm of Chronix, you know, basically these time traveling gods, and let's see if we can't figure out what in the world is going on with them and see if there's a way that we can basically go back and defeat Gorr or see what it was that I did that led to this circumstance in the first place. And so jumping back to Thor in the past, we end up having this moment where during the final battle between himself and Gorr, he was effectively captured and taken prisoner. And the cool thing here is that Gorr basically, you know, the reason why I say his narrative is so cool is because he starts taunting Thor. You know, now again, when it comes to Gorr's character, while he is sadistic, while he is twisted, his goal is to just kill gods. And so really torturing Thor is just as much for fun as it is for, you know, resulting in the death of Thor in the first place. But the other half of this is that Gorr cannot simply just kill people by himself. He needs to know where they are. He needs to be able to access them. And that's basically what he's been doing. Going on a mission and just traveling throughout the universe and killing gods wherever he finds them, just happening to stumble across them would take so long. But if he can find a god and he can torture that god for information and then kill him, that god god will lead him to other gods, which will lead him to other gods. And in turn, he'll just be traveling around the cosmos, obliterating everything. And that's what he's been doing. That's really how it all started. He basically took the Necrosword, he became a god, and in turn began torturing other gods for information. Now again, for the character of Thor, the torture that comes here is just simply for Gorr to be able to access Asgard. Now, we know that if Gorr were to access Asgard and try to kill everybody, likely it wouldn't happen. Odin would probably kill him, which begs the question, where's Odin at in the future? Why is it that all the Asgardians are dead? Again, it creates kind of a really cool narrative, and it begs so many questions, and it makes things incredibly bleak. But again, back in the future with old King Thor, really this is just kind of like a continuous last stand, where he's constantly just trying to take down these various iterations of Gorr the God Butcher's forces, constantly trying to tear them down time and time again, at the very least, trying to defeat him. And it really seems like he's fighting a losing battle. He's a one-man army against a veritable horde of forces coming from Gorr. And it really seems like he's just going to spend eternity fighting and basically surviving, and that's it. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that during this conflict, he basically fights off against a bunch of these forces. He's effectively consumed, put back on his throne, only for him to continue the pattern of trying to fight them off again. And so that's really going to be his life for the rest of eternity, is just trying to face off against the forces of Gorr and never being successful. It's almost like Sisyphus having to push the rock up the mountain, or whatever it was, that mythological story where he's constantly doomed to push the rock up the mountain, and then as soon as, when it seemed like he's going to get to the top, it comes tumbling back down again. And so it's basically him just kind of doomed to live out this existence forever and ever and ever. And so again, what we end up doing is we basically travel, or I guess we follow Gorr in the modern day in his attempts to travel into the past. Again, this is really what he's been doing as Thor's been trying to track him down. And what ultimately ends up happening here is Gorr basically accesses the Chronix gods, and by virtue of spilling their own blood, he's able to use the power imbued with them to travel back in time. Now, the reason for why he's doing this is to actually travel all the way back to the very beginnings, to the formation of all things. Now, this is kind of an interesting scenario, because when it comes to Marvel Comics, there have been so many different tellings of how the universe came into existence. I mean, there's the telling that comes out of the classic Thor 161 and 162, I think it is, where Galactus basically recounts his origin story to Thor. There's Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. There is Al Ewing's Ultimates 2, the troubleshooter story, where we basically end up seeing the new origin of all things in existence. The origins have been told time and time again. What's usually left to the writer is what happens after the universe comes into existence. And that's usually what writers end up kind of building on, is looking at this and saying, okay, look, the universe came into existence because the previous universe collapsed in on itself. It was a cosmic egg. It exploded with energy, and now we have the modern universe. What happens after that? Now, in terms of where life comes from, this again has been explained several times over. Jonathan Hickman, for example, introduced a group called the Builders, and the Builders basically just traveled around the universe, seeding worlds and creating stars and so on and so forth. But if you go and you read some old X-Men stories, they'll tell you that the Celestials are the oldest living things, and the Celestials are what basically created the universe, and then the multiverse. There's a lot of different stories that go on here, but what Jason Aaron is saying is that in the early days, 14 billion years ago, there were simply the Elder Gods, or at least there was the original Elder God, and this original Elder God gave birth to other Elder Gods, which in turn gave birth to more gods, which led to the creation of planets and stars and all that kind of good stuff. And so the goal of Gorr is to basically kill this Elder God, steal its heart, which will grant him all the power that he pretty much needs, and then from there, go forward. Now, the reason why he had to travel 14 billion years ago is because Elder Gods don't exist anymore. Remember, we did our video series on, a history of the Marvel Universe. The Elder Gods had basically wiped each other out to the brink of extinction. There was really nothing left. I mean, they're all virtually extinct. I mean, as far as I'm aware, there are no more Elder Gods. Not only that, it's really kind of like the half-life concept, which is to say, you can never create anything that is equal to yourself. In some form or fashion, it will always only be a fraction of you. Two parents, for example, cannot create a child, and that child has all the traits of one parent and none of the traits of the other. It'll have a combination of both traits. With regards to, what goes on in Marvel Comics, it's this idea that whenever an Elder God gives birth to another Elder God, that new Elder God is only half of what the original Elder God could be. And so going back to the very first Elder God is as powerful as any Elder God is ever going to be. It's basically the creator of all things. And so by stealing its heart, it basically imbues God Butcher, it imbues Gorr with all the power that he will need, or at the very least, it can offer a source of all the power he'll ever need. Now, the other half of this is also just pride, right? It's also just Gorr kind of testing himself, seeing what he can do, how far he's come, and being able to kill an Elder God, a being of such immense power, means that he is insanely capable in terms of what he's able to do, in terms of how efficient he is. The fact remains here, jumping into the past, the motivation for Gorr Gorr doing everything that he's done is because of the fact that he encountered Thor. And that's why I really wanted to wait to this part of the story to expand on this in order to kind of, give you guys a lot of the information that was there and then tie it all together. And that's what makes this so cool. With Gorr the God Butcher, his motivation in killing gods was singular. I mean, he was just a guy who was pissed and hated gods and wanted to kill them because he'd lost his family. That's his condensed origin story in 10 seconds. That's all he ever did. He just traveled the cosmos and killed gods. And his motivation was to just do that. He never really had a reason to question it. He never really had a reason to believe there was anyone out there that could challenge him until he met Thor. And then Thor forced Gorr to experience his very first defeat. And so what Thor represented was the idea that there are still gods out there who are more powerful than Gorr. There are still gods out there that Gorr simply just can't defeat because Thor, for example, just has the will to win. He has the fighting experience, he has the prowess, he has the strength, he has the enchanted weapons at his disposal. At the end of the day, Gorr just can't beat him through conventional means. And so what Gorr began to do was basically go around and kill all the other gods that existed out there, absorb their power, and then basically went back, killed an elder god for the purpose of traveling into the future and securing his reign. And so that's ultimately what's going on here. It's essentially trying to bypass Thor. But that's the idea, is that Thor is the source of all this. He's the reason why all this is happening. He's the reason why all this is taking place. Gorr had been killing gods for a while, but it wasn't until Thor arrived on the scene that Gorr encountered someone that he couldn't beat through normal means. And so what ends up happening here is that with in the present day, with Thor arriving to this realm of the Chronix gods to discover that Gorr has just jumped into the time stream and traveled into the future, Thor immediately follows after him. And so what ends up happening here is that modern day Thor basically ends up traveling thousands of years into the future with future Thor. And so both modern Thor and old King Thor are basically fighting side by side in their bid to take out the forces of Gorr the God Butcher. So what this does is it actually ends the story on a massive cliffhanger because the question is asked, what's going on? First of all, why is it that Gorr basically rules with absolute control in the future? 2, what happened to Earth? 3, where are all the Asgardians? And 4, how does it end? Okay, so during my 1 million subscriber live stream, as short as it was something like maybe 25 minutes, wasn't anything outrageous, but I had talked about how I wanted to begin shifting my focus from Marvel Comics away from all new, all different Marvel and focus on some classic stories. And we're gonna test the waters here a little bit. I wanna do the origin of Gorr the God Butcher. And the reason why is because this guy's amazing. We did the God Butcher storyline as like an episode of the Rundown, which was fun, but I also wanted to, I've always wanted to do like an actual tried and true Thor the God Butcher, or I guess Thor God of Thunder, the God Butcher storyline explained video. I've been wanting to do this for quite a while, and I've been trying to find a way to fit it in. The issue with this is that Benny over Comic Storian is doing Thor God of Thunder. There we go. He's doing that when the Thor movie comes out, I think. And we're actually going to kind of switch, because what I'm going to do when the Thor movie comes out is we're going to start with Thor Ragnarok and then just work our way all the way up through Straczynski's run, up to this point to God Butcher. Assuming you guys care about this, then we'll just do this, God Butcher run, and then we'll do like God Bomb, and then we'll do, Last Days of Midgard, and there's one more, I think it is. I think Last Days of Midgard is the last part, but we're just going to test the waters, and we're going to experiment and see how you guys respond to us doing some classic stories with regards to Thor stuff. So Gorr the God Butcher is a pretty cool character. He's pretty cool. He's pretty interesting, and he's pretty tragic at the same time. And the reason why is because of the fact that this was a guy who basically just ran across the cosmos, killing every single god he found. And it was one of the most interesting stories to have ever been done with this character. But what this does, at least what this comic does, is it just kind of goes back to the early days. And it really tells us how Gorr ended up from being, how he went from being just a regular guy to eventually becoming a murderer who was just killing gods all across the cosmos. And so what we do is we jump to about 3,000 years in the past, and we actually pick up with this pretty dark and pretty sinister environment. I mean, it's not dark in terms of, light or anything like that, but it's a very harsh environment. It's full of all kinds of predators. The people who live on it are nomads, meaning they just travel from one location to the next, simply trying to make their way and trying to survive. In this instance, what ends up happening is the mother of Gorr is basically killed by some of the natural beasts that just kind of roam around the landscape, monsters or, whatever the natural predators are. But this in turn instills in him a lack of faith in gods. And the reason why is because as they make their way across this planet and as they try to reach their chosen place, their eternal land, whatever you want to call it, his wife is of course pregnant with what seems to be, their third or fourth child. The issue with this is that as they're traveling, his wife basically steps on some loose rocks and she falls to her death. And so all that's left to him is for his son, or at least for him to carry his son, his oldest child, as well as what other villagers are left, and try to make their way to their chosen destination. But Gorr the God Butcher has basically just lost faith in God. gods. And the reason why is because the people pray day after day. They constantly pray for sustenance. They constantly pray for nourishment. The son of Gorr dies in his arms because he doesn't have water. He doesn't have any food. They're basically just living this really terrible and really crappy life. But the faith of the tribe is what gets them through. They've got their own religious leaders, their own spiritual leaders. They've got guys that basically say, look, we have to pray to the gods. And if we do, then the gods will give us what we need to survive. Now, something that Jason Aaron is doing with this little bit of a story is he's kind of going back and forth with things, right? Like he's kind of bordering on this realm of literal and metaphorical in the sense that where, these guys basically say, look, we kind of have to pray to the gods and we have to, beg that they will give us the things that we need. In reality, the gods will not provide them, and Gorr doesn't even believe they exist. All he does is he just looks around at a really harsh environment. Now, it's entirely possible that this planet is not hospitable, which begs the question, how did the people, how did they arrive to where they are now? How did they evolve this far? We're not given an answer to that. It could be they just crash landed here and they've been there for, several generations and they're effectively dying off because they can't live in the environment. There's any number of reasons why this is the case. But for Gorr himself, he looks around and says, if the gods really cared about us, if the gods really listened to our prayers and listened to our hopes, we wouldn't be dying of starvation. We wouldn't be dying of dehydration. They would bless us with water. They would bless us with rain. They'd give us some sign that they actually exist. Now, of course, this in response is meant to basically be viewed as heresy, but it also kind of makes sense that people would respond that way. And the reason why is because what Gorr is doing is effectively taking away their hope. The people that he's walking with, the gods that they believe in, are the only thing that stands between them and just giving up. It's the only thing that stands between them and just saying, yeah, there's no help coming, and then just laying down and dying. Believing that the gods will answer their prayers if they pray long enough is the only hope they have that their lives will get better. And that makes sense. Nobody wants to believe that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. People want to believe that there's a better tomorrow on the horizon. That's just the nature of people. Even if there isn't, even if there's no hope of getting out of their circumstance, people want to believe that there is. Now, of course, Gorr answering this and basically saying that hope is nonsensical leads to him being cast out by his own tribe. And so on the verge of dying, he's suddenly met by the arrival of two gods. Now, this is where Jason Aaron also plays it a little fast and loose, because how these guys are depicted, one gold, one black, is clearly an allegory to good and evil. That's clearly what it's designed to be. But this also shows this sort of, struggle that's been going on between the two of them for eons and eons and eons. But for those of you guys who read The Unworthy Thor, and those of you guys who read, where Nick Fury had basically told Thor Gorr was right, this is really what it's kind of hearkening down to. These gods, the gods of this planet, of this realm, or this region, may very well exist, but they probably don't care about the goings on of people on the mundane ground, who are just kind of living out their regular lives. I mean, how many comics have you seen where Thor rescues a homeless man, or where Thor gives money to a homeless man, or he saves him? How many comics have there been where Thor saves some little girl who's in an abusive situation with parents, or some guy who's being beat up by a bully or something like that? You don't see those comics. Those comics don't exist. The only comics that you see are comics where Thor is fighting alongside the Avengers, where he's fighting in Asgard. He's going against, the Frost Giants or something like that. It's Jason Aaron hitting at the nature of the comics, the stories that we've seen, and said, look, maybe it is true. If the gods exist, then why don't they care about the small guys? Why don't they care about the little guys? Why do they just fight amongst themselves with all their nonsense? And that's really what's being hit at home here with regards to Gorr, because one of these gods survives and begs for help. The immediate response of Gorr is, why would I help you? Where were you at when my mom died? Where were you at when my wife died? Where were you at when all these different members of these tribes had died? But in truth, it would be like screaming at Thor because a man's wife was run over by a car. Could Thor have really saved her? Possibly, but there's no guarantee that he could have. It's really just the wrath and the anger and the emotion and the pain that Gorr has felt over the course of his life, and just experiencing loss after loss after loss after loss, that all really comes to a head. And so ultimately what ends up happening here is that some of this power, at least it seems to be that way, of this dark god basically allows itself to be used by Gorr, and it actually takes the form of what's called the Necrosword. Now, of course, the Necrosword will be a major aspect of his character going forward in the realm of Thor the God Butcher, of that particular story. But Gorr, having this power, basically gives him the ability of a god. The difference is that he doesn't quite know how to use it yet, and that's the importance, is that over the course of the next several millennia, he'll basically begin to harness his skills. And so what ends up happening is that we actually transition to another realm, to a different universe called Earth 14412, 14412, I think is what it's called. And we actually pick up, in the future of this universe where we basically have like Volstagg, who's normally part of the Warriors 3, but is clearly in shape and trimmed down, who's being tortured and then eventually killed by Gorr. And he basically keeps kind of taunting, Volstagg and so on and so forth. And Volstagg even makes the claim, look, if you have the power of a god and you're going around and you're killing other gods, what do you think that makes you? Do you think it makes you a good guy or do you think it makes you a bad guy? It's basically saying you have essentially become what it is that you hate the most. Now, this particular universe, not this situation, but this particular universe is extremely important. And the reason why is because of the fact that over the course of God Butcher and God Bomb, Jason Aaron will span 3 different time periods. He'll span in the early days of Thor, back when he was younger. He'll go in the present day, and then he'll go in the future. The future in this particular universe where this matters, the reason why this is important is because this is a reality where Loki destroyed everything on Earth. He wiped out all life on Earth, all the superheroes, all the humans, the whole 9 yards. Everything's gone. Loki literally killed everybody. That's where things are different. That's where it branches off from. That's what makes that universe different. Everything else in, Thor the God Butcher is, the past of the main Marvel universe or the present day in the main Marvel universe. This is in the future of an alternate universe. And so that's one of the cool things about that little tidbit. But anyway, guys, I figured it'd be kind of a cool video to make. I thought it'd be pretty enjoyable to talk about the origin of Gorr the God Butcher. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty short. The reason why is because his character gets a huge amount of development in Thor the God Butcher, in the actual, Thor God of Thunder. I keep saying Thor the God Butcher. He gets a lot of character development in Thor God of Thunder Volume 1 and the God Butcher storyline. Really, it's the story that kind of made him so cool. Art is amazing by Asad Ribic. It looks absolutely insane. But in my mind, it's probably the greatest Thor story ever told. Getting into God Bomb, this basically brings the end of Gorr the God Butcher. This is kind of like the self-contained story. And that was a cool thing. I mean, I imagine that, with Jason Aaron, when he was writing this story, it was all designed to be one great big cohesive thing. I mean, once the time comes when Jason Aaron, when Marvel announces that Jason Aaron is now leaving Thor, you'll literally be able to pick up with God Butcher and just read all the way up to wherever he stopped, and it'll just be one cohesive story. And I have, and I will continue to say that this is the greatest run of Thor that there's ever been. Like, I've read so many runs of Thor. I've read Matt Fraction, I've read Straczynski, I've read Walt Simonson, and to me, I sit down and I say, this is the best run there's ever been. I mean, all the other ones are great, they're fun, they're interesting, I like them, but in terms of development, in terms of storytelling, in terms of expansion, in terms of the art and how gorgeous it is, this is the greatest run of Thor that I think there has ever been. And so, picking up from the last video, when we had basically talked about the idea that Gorr the God Butcher had essentially jumped to the future after grabbing the heart of the first Elder God, this essentially fueled his power. Now keep in mind, as Gorr kills gods and takes their blood or whatever the case may be, he expands his own powers. And so in the future, he's become really the most powerful being in existence among the traditional pantheon of gods. I mean, keep in mind, if like the living tribunal showed up and was like, okay, you basically disrupted the balance of all things, the living tribunal would just phase him out of existence. Eternity could destroy, Gorr the God Butcher. I mean, there's a litany of ways that like Jason Aaron could end this. They wouldn't be fun, but he could end them in a whole litany of ways. But the idea here is that we initially pick up with with modern day Thor and King Thor. Now, this is where things are going to get a lot more streamlined than they were, because in God Butcher, we were following 3 eras of Thor. In this story, we are, but they're all in the same place. So it's not like we're jumping through the past, present, and the future and trying to confine it into a story and make it make sense. Instead, we are basically just kind of covering all different versions of these Thor in the same point in time. So we'll still call them like young Thor, I guess, past Thor and modern Thor and King Thor. But the fact remains here that with modern Thor and King Thor meeting together, some of the questions that we have are answered to a degree. One of the things that he basically states is that in this era, that about 900 years before this current moment, Gorr had just shown up on Asgard and invaded Asgard proper. And in doing so, he had essentially taken all the Asgardians prisoner with the exception of Thor himself. Thor was forced to basically stay on Asgard and just fend off against wave after wave after wave of the Black Berserkers of Gorr. Now, this begs the question, what happened to Odin? Now, when it comes to the character of Odin, we have what's called Ragnarok. Ragnarok, and we'll talk more about this once we actually get to like the Ragnarok story. Ragnarok is basically the end times of Asgard. It is the apocalypse of Asgard. But what Thor had learned and what we as the reader had learned was that Ragnarok was a constantly repeating cycle. That to the Asgardians, to their mind, you would eventually have Surtur, who would kill Odin. Loki would launch a war against Asgard. he would invade, he would conquer Asgard, Thor would be killed, and then eventually the Asgardians would be killed, and that would be it. Everybody in Asgard would effectively just die. Like that would be, you know, they'd die in some grandiose battle, but they would all end up dying. What we learned was that there was this group called the Ones Who Sit Above in Shadow, who have been feeding on this cycle. And so where Thor looks at the modern day and says, this is the only life that I have, in reality, he's been repeating his life over and over and over again. He just didn't know it. And the Ones Who Sit Above in Shadow were feeding on this perpetual cycle of Ragnarok. Now, eventually Odin figured out what was going on. And instead of Thor just staying in Asgard, Odin basically cast Thor out. It's one of the reasons why he banished him and then confined him to Earth so that he would be raised on Earth and would eventually, you know, come across this path that would lead to the death of Odin. And Thor would have the reason to ask what's going on here, because by his own involvement with Captain America and Iron Man and different things like that, he would see the world through the perspective of a human, which in turn would create curiosity. And in his curiosity, he would want to know what's going on with Ragnarok, how does it work, and how do I stop it from happening? And so again, it's really kind of a cool scenario in terms of how that unfolds. We'll get into a far more in-depth explanation of Ragnarok once we get around to that story with the release of Thor 3. But the fact remains here that because of the fact that Thor knows what Ragnarok is, because he's aware of Ragnarok, so does King Thor, since he's basically Thor in the future. And so the idea here is that in his mind, Odin has effectively just died somewhere along the line. That's really what it is. I mean, Odin has basically just kind of moved on, and Thor has what's called the Thor Force. Now, the Thor Force and the Odin Force, those are just names given to whoever it is that's wielding that particular power. The Odin Force is just an insane amount of energy that Odin has, and it allows him to do whatever it is that he wants to do at any particular point in time. It's a plot device. When Odin dies, that power passes to Thor, and it becomes the Thor Force. Likewise, it could be that both Odin and Thor die, and the power would pass to Loki, and it would become the Loki Force. It's just whoever it is that's wielding that power at any particular point in time. But the fact remains that King Thor has the Thor Force. The difference is that, remember, the Thor Force is like a battery. So anybody who wields it long enough, if they do not go into the Odin sleep or the Thor sleep, in this case, they would just basically run out of power. And that's really what it is. He's been fighting for so long, and he's exhausted so much energy, he can't go into the Thor sleep. He can't rest, otherwise, you know, there wouldn't be anybody to defend Asgard. And so the result is that his power is effectively almost completely defeated. Now, with the arrival of modern Thor, what this does is it rekindles hope. It rekindles the possibility that he may yet live. It rekindles the possibility that Asgard could very well be saved. At the same time, modern Thor and future Thor are joined by past Thor. And the reason why is because of the fact that past Thor basically has this dream where he realizes that Gorr the God Butcher isn't dead, where he previously believed he had killed him. One of Gorr's black berserkers kind of throws like this Cronus charge at him or something like that. Anyway, just time displaces him and it teleports him to the future. That's really all it is. Of course, he rises up through the pond. The difference here is that he does not immediately join modern and future Thor. Instead, he's actually forced into being a subject. He's forced into being a slave. Now, the reason for this is twofold. The first half is that in the mind of Gorr, he's captured so many gods already and his power is so extreme, he's not worried about modern or future Thor. Now, that will be really the source of his undoing, and that's his hubris. The other half of this is that because Thor is so strong and because Thor is so capable and because he is the one that almost killed Gorr, capturing Thor is really more of like a trophy than anything else. You know, I finally captured the guy who almost killed me. You know, it's basically Gorr kind of solidifying in his own mind that he is indeed the god of gods, so to speak, that he's the one person that's going to bring everything crashing down. And so with this in mind, what King Thor tells modern Thor is that, again, where Gorr had basically showed up on Asgard, he had captured all the Asgardians. Those who fought against Gorr had basically been killed, and those who had been captured had been whisked off to a planet on the far side of the universe where Gorr is building a god bomb, a bomb that's designed to eliminate all gods. We follow King Thor and modern Thor over to the location of where Gorr is hanging out at. Now, getting a little bit more into this whole idea of a god bomb, what we end up finding out is that Gorr is not entirely wrong. Now, for those of you guys who are reading Unworthy Thor, this is why Jason Aaron's run is so important. This is why Jason Aaron's run is so significant. There's a conversation that happens between Gorr and his son. We don't really know where his son came from. We don't know why he's there, but there's a conversation that happens between the two of them. And what Gorr says is that in his mind, gods are inherently evil. Gods are inherently bad. Gods, you know, answer the prayers of their followers based on a whim. They may choose not to answer. They may choose to answer. It's just kind of doing whatever they want to do when they do it and how they do it and so on and so forth. And so because of that, Gorr wants to eliminate them all. The purpose of the god bomb is to essentially detonate the bomb so that when it goes off, it will kill all gods throughout the time stream. Gods from the present, gods from the past, gods from the future, those who may have been hidden away from Gorr that he just didn't know about and never caught and killed, those who were never caught and captured, whatever the case may be, they will die all throughout the time stream. Now, notice the motivation of Gorr with this mindset. Gorr has basically been passing this information onto his son. And so when Gorr's son speaks directly with Thor, who's basically working as a prisoner, Gorr's son basically says, look, what this is going to do is it's going to usher in a great era. It's going to usher in an era where people don't fight over which god's real and which god's false. People won't fight over which god's right and which god is wrong. People will not live their lives waiting for an eternity of splendor or fearing an eternity of hell. People will live in the moment. They will value what they have. They will recognize this life is the only life they have, and they will treat it that way. They will take the most advantage out of it. That's not wrong. And that's the coolest thing about that, is because that's what Nick Fury was saying when he whispered to Odin's son and he said Gorr was right and it made him unworthy. It was the hammer realizing that's true. Like, it's true. Like, people, people like Thor, they represent the ideology that people don't value the life they have. They value the life they hope they have. And so again, it's basically, never really living in the moment. That's why Jane Foster was chosen, because she's literally a person dying of cancer. Every moment could be her last. And so she values what she has left of her life, because for her, she doesn't view the possibility of an afterlife. She doesn't view the possibility of going to heaven. She views the life that she has as being the only one she has, and she looks to make the most of it. She's living in the present, not living in the future. That's why the hammer chose her. And that's why it's so cool. That's why all this wraps around and creates one great big cohesive story, because you get a little piece here and you get a little piece there, and then you get a little piece over there somewhere, and then it all comes together to create this amazing cohesive story where everything is important. And that's why I love it so much. That's why it's such a cool thing. Now from here, we are introduced to the granddaughters of King Thor. And this is really kind of cool because these chicks, they do not play. Like, they are they are hardcore. But the funny thing about this is that while they are being forced to work in subservience, which is to say to basically help build this god bomb, at the end of the day, they're also planning a way to get out. And the funny thing is that with past Thor being so young, being so brash, being so reckless, showing up here, having been captured and saying, well, we have to fight and we have to win and we have to get our freedom, he's not thinking rationally. He's not thinking according to a plan. And that's really what Jason Aaron is hitting on when it comes to these different iterations of Thor. And that's something that I hope you notice. Past Thor is young. I mean, he's young, he's brash. Let's just battle. When it comes to modern day Thor is a little more reasonable. He's a little more thinking. He's still quick to fight. He's still quick to battle. But King Thor is old. He's wise. It is basically the steps of Thor as he becomes essentially Odin, as he eventually gets to the point where he realizes that sometimes you can't just fight directly. Sometimes you need a plan. Sometimes you have to function accordingly. Sometimes you just have to be intelligent about what you do. And so it's really kind of cool to see these different iterations coming together. But of course, with young Thor, he's basically told, look, get back to work, keep your mouth shut, do not draw attention to us. And the reason why is because picking up later that night with the granddaughters of King Thor, we ultimately find that what they've done is they basically constructed a bomb of their own. And the reason why is because of the fact that in 3 days, the god bomb will be finished and every god everywhere in existence will be destroyed. And when that happens, all things will essentially come crashing down, including all of them there. And so the goal is to basically destroy this god bomb before it can go off. Now, of course, the funny thing about this, and this is really when like the brash nature of young Thor comes into the equation, when he simply just grabs the bomb and races off. Races off with the god bomb with the intention of destroying it. Now, things get a little bit murky at this point, and I would imagine Jason Aaron kind of fast-tracked things a bit. And the reason why is because of the fact that where the bomb is detonated, we immediately transition over to King Thor and modern Thor, where they're facing off against some of these gods that are basically being used, like these shark gods that are being used as kind of like guards of the planet of Gorr. And then they're suddenly met with the arrival of young Thor. We don't know how he got there. We don't know, if he was just teleported, if the god bomb went off, and he was just suddenly moved away. We're not really sure exactly why it is that he's here. We just know that he is. But alongside modern Thor and alongside King Thor, what they basically say is we have to destroy Gorr. We have to kill him so that we can make sure that all gods everywhere survive. So we effectively have 3 different Thors fighting in the same battle, and it is a sight to behold. Now, from here, we get into the downfall of Gorr, and this is one of the greatest things about this. With Jason Aaron's storytelling, he does not take a conventional approach with ending stories, which is to say, hey guys, here's a really cool event, and it's done. It doesn't go that way with Jason Aaron. Jason Aaron really kind of builds up, he builds characters up, and then he gives them a gradual downfall, and it's usually an ironic downfall. Against the force of 3 Thors, Gorr cannot pull it off, and what Jason Aaron Aaron is basically saying here is that Thor is unique among all the gods that are in existence because of his desire for battle, because of his desire for conflict, because he's so capable at what he does. He cannot simply just be defeated like any sort of god. When you have 3 of them, they are nigh unstoppable. And so Gorr literally throws every single thing he has at them. He kills other gods that are currently his slaves to absorb their power and increase his own, and he still can't pull it off initially. And so what we end up having is all 3 of these gods racing into Gorr, engaging in this massive battle, which leads into them basically kind of being, I guess, catapulted into the sun. Now, this is kind of cool. Actually, this is pretty damn amazing, to be honest with you guys. And the reason why is because of the fact that with 3 Thors facing off against Gorr, we would expect them to win, right? Like we would expect them to take the day, only for Gorr to, for the battle to end, for all 3 Thors to come crashing back to Earth, and for Gorr to have been the one that came out triumphant. And so what Jason Aaron does is he gives us this amazing crescendo. It's almost like this feeling that all hope is lost, that Gorr has managed to defeat 3 Thors, and they all have an incredible endurance, fighting prowess, the whole 9 yards, and Gorr still wins. And so again, it's a very terrifying situation. But what we end up doing is we pick up with the wife of Gorr when she basically begins, kind of talking to her husband. Now, this is where the downfall comes into play. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that she says, look, I look forward to an era when the god bomb is detonated. I look forward to an era when there are no more gods out there, when there are no more people to worship, and she expresses her affection by basically referring to him and saying, you are my god. In return, Gorr kills her, and that's where the downfall comes into play. And the reason why is because of the fact that the entire scenario is observed by the son of Gorr. Now, where the son plays along and says, look, yes, I can't wait for this bomb to go off, yada, 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 we'll get everything set up and going. At the end of the day, he intends to kill his father because his father killed his mother. And so again, it's so cool because usually whenever it comes to like dystopian rulers or like totalitarians or something like that, the one thing they fear is someone rising up and either becoming a martyr or mustering all the forces together and just outright bringing them down. It's the one thing that Gorr fears above all others. He fears someone rising up with enough power to bring him crashing down. And it's that way with every single narrative when there's someone with absolute power. Now, it doesn't mean that they are successfully defeated, but it does mean that it is one thing that they fear. And so by going through and basically charging up this god bomb with one of the Thors who's remained captured by Gorr, as well as the other 2 Thors, trying to climb back into battle, climbing up mountainsides from wherever it was that they landed, the modern Thor is basically rescued by the son of Gorr. And the son of Gorr says, look, my father killed my mother. I will help you defeat my father. Now, the reason why this is so cool is because the son of Gorr represents what Gorr used to be. In the origin story of Gorr, Gorr used to be a guy where he was basically just trying to live a reasonable life. I mean, he had a wife, he had children of his own. He was very mortal. He was very emotional, dare I say, very human in terms of how he existed. It was only after he lost everything that he became so dark and he became so bleak. But his son is still who Gorr used to be. His son still cares about others. His son still feels love, still feels emotion, still feels affection. And so because of that, in his anger, in his wrath, and in his desire for revenge, he takes a side against his father. In doing this, it grants a reprieve for all 3 Thors to reband back together again and begin the process of waging a war against Gorr, trying to bring him down. Now, this is where things get incredibly cool because as each one begins to take on Gorr, each one of them begins to meet their defeat. And ultimately, it comes down to the modern day version of Thor, who picks up both his hammer and the hammer of King Thor. Now, this is something that we've almost never seen before. I don't think I've ever seen an instance when we've had a Thor wield 2 hammers at the same time. Now, this is crazy because the power of the hammers has always been something that's a little bit ambiguous. And even then, when this story was written, the power behind the hammers had not been explained by Jason Aaron. Now, we know now that it's just like this sentient cosmic storm. It's basically cosmic energy inside this hammer that's been harnessed by Odin so that Thor can use it. Having 2 hammers composed of cosmic energy creates a level of power hitherto unrivaled. And so what this does with Thor essentially smashing them together, it allows him to both destroy the god bomb before it kills any of the other gods across all time and space, as well as absorb the Necrosword. Now, what this does is it basically transforms Thor into the god of gods, because we now have Thor wielding the all-black Necrosword, a weapon designed to do nothing more than kill gods and destroy worlds, as well as wielding 2 hammers. This is probably the single greatest picture that I've ever seen in my life when it comes to Thor. He looks so badass with his whole getup. He's just like cloud and black with 2 hammers. I mean, it's one of the coolest things that I've ever seen. But Gorr has essentially lost the source of his power. That's really what it is. He has no power left. There's nothing left coming to him. He is effectively as mortal as he was in his origin story. And so because of this, because of the fact that Gorr has been defeated, his son appears to him and says, look, I am the source of your defeat. But what we also end up learning is that his son is not actually his son. Instead, his son was a construct created by the Necrosword. So again, this is really kind of an interesting scenario, because what it does is it shows us that deep in his core, once you get past his whole desire to kill gods, Gorr was still very much, human, so to speak, in the sense that he wanted offspring, he wanted a life. But it also shows us that he was not just inherently evil. He may have lost his way, he may have fallen down the wrong path, but at the end of the day, his motivation was to basically create a world or a universe, a reality without gods, because in his mind, the gods were the source of all suffering that existed out there. And so it begs the question, how many civilizations have suffered? How many people have died across the universe because the gods did not answer their call? Again, rolling back into the idea of why the Hammer chose Jane Foster to be worthy instead of allowing Odin's son to be worthy. So again, it's a beautiful story that all kind of comes together and, really becomes cohesive. But in these final moments, Gorr's effectively defeated by being decapitated, and that's really about it. I mean, from there, there's really nothing more that goes on with this character. That's pretty much the end of him. And so what this does is it gives us kind of a really cool epilogue, in the sense that we pick up about 3 days later after this battle, in the sense that Asgard has turned into this sort of beacon and home for gods across the cosmos, that all gods from all these different races are all kind of coming back. They're arriving on Asgard. It's going to serve as a major hub. Of course, what's left of the Asgardians still reside there. We don't know explicitly what role that, Asgard will play in the future, at least not yet. But at this moment, we just sort of pick up with the idea that everybody's living out the rest of their lives. That past Thor, that modern Thor are sent back to their own times respectively. King Thor stays in the future. And that's really it. I mean, that's really the idea that they just kind of go back to doing what they were doing before. But what this does is it sets the stage for the arrival of Galactus on Earth. And it actually sets the stage for old King Thor versus Galactus and the question of what it is that happened to Earth in this reality. Okay, so getting into Jason Aaron's Thor God of Thunder, I guess, last days of Midgard, this story is actually split in two. And it's really kind of interesting the way this is done, is because the part that we're going to be focusing on here is Thor fighting Galactus, since that's the part you guys care about. The other half of this is basically setting the stage for like Roxxon Oil to get involved with Malekith and his desire to launch his War of the Nine Realms and so on and so forth. And we'll wrap back around to that, because this really kind of like ends Jason Aaron's run. But we will wrap back around to this once we pick back up with Thor with the release of Ragnarok. So we've got a little while. We've got a little bit of time before we jump back into Thor again. That is, we might start our X-Men run and then pause the X-Men run for Thor Ragnarok and then do all the Thor stories going up to this, which is Jason Aaron's run, and then go back into X-Men again, because there's no chronological series of videos on the X-Men stories after the events of House of M, but we'll cross that bridge once we get to it. One thing to keep in mind, and I'm really kind of debating on whether or not this is something that we're going to cover, because it's not wildly significant, it's just a thing he did in the future, but essentially Earth itself is completely uninhabited because of the fact that Loki basically obliterated all life on the planet. Now, this was covered in Loki Agent of Asgard, and Loki Agent of Asgard was basically designed to kind of emphasize his character. The problem with doing that is, in order to understand why Loki Agent of Asgard happens, we have to understand why he's young again, why he's trying to change his ways. And in order to understand why he's trying to change his ways, we have to understand why he was a little boy, why he was a chick. All of that stuff comes out of Thor Ragnarok. So again, Ragnarok was kind of like the House of M, or kind of like the reboot, so to speak. Because of that, all we really need to know is that Loki basically obliterated all life on Earth, and that was really all there is. But what this did is it set the stage for the arrival of Galactus. Now keep in mind, this section of the story takes place millions of years, or at least maybe not millions, but thousands and thousands of years in the future. So even if humanity hadn't been wiped out by Loki, it certainly would have died off at some point along the line. But the fact remains here that Galactus is still, again, very much alive. Now this really, and it'll probably drag a lot of questions into fray, this really kind of throws into sharp relief the nature of Secret Wars. Now, something that I want to point out here is how Secret Wars fits into the chronology of events in Marvel Comics. And this is where Marvel tends to contradict itself. In Marvel Comics, you have a character named Cable. And Cable is a guy that hails from the future. The guy is a retconning machine. Essentially, if Marvel wants to change something, they'll have Cable just suddenly travel back in time for whatever reason, and he's like, I'm here to prevent this from happening. Case in point, Civil War. When the original Civil War event happened, Cable and Deadpool still still had their team-up comic, Cable jumped into the past and said, hey, look, Mr. President, if you do this, I know where this is going to lead to, and you're not going to like it. So it was basically kind of fitting it in. And so the issue with Cable's character is everything that happens between right now at any given point in Marvel Comics and the future is all part of Cable's timeline. The issue with this, and the reason why it's so important, is because in this particular story, we're kind of left to believe that had Secret Wars not happened, then this series of events would have transpired some, 5, 6, 7,000 years in the future. And so the best way to think about this is that whenever you pick up a Marvel story and it says thousands of years in the future or something like that, and it's a story that took place before Secret Wars, then basically just act as though that story took place as if Secret Wars never happened, and for whatever reason, Secret Wars ended up taking place. And so because that, it's really the only way we have to kind of rectify these two things and sort of bring them together. But the fact remains here, remember, for the character of Thor, Midgard, which is basically Earth, had been his home for quite some time. Now, of course, again, this really all kind of cycles back to Ragnarok in and of itself, but at the same time, it's also just the idea of him having been a superhero on Earth, fought alongside the, Captain America and the Incredible Hulk and so many different superheroes, having met Jane Foster there, having been a friend to humanity in so many different ways. It's really kind of him just sort of losing a piece of himself. And so what Thor routinely does is he travels back to Earth for no other reason than to just kind of gather his bearings and to just kind of, pay homage to the world that gave him so much and to sort of mourn over the friends that he's lost because of the actions of Loki. The problem with this is that Thor, alongside his granddaughters basically showing up here, is suddenly met with the arrival of Galactus. Now, for Thor, this is as much an affront as it is really the final battle, because remember, as it stands right now, in terms of like the old gods, so to speak, which is to say those who lived on Asgard as far back as Asgard goes, the idea here is that Thor is really the last of the old Asgardians, and Earth is the last refuge. It's really the one thing that he can't let go. And so because of this, he actually banishes his granddaughters away. Now, this makes sense because you have to keep in mind, in the mind of Thor, he's fought Galactus so many times, and while his granddaughters know who Galactus is, they are not prepared for the kind of power that Galactus possesses. Now, something else to point out here is Jason Aaron didn't just arbitrarily grab Galactus. He wasn't just sitting in like, you know what, I think we should have some kind of a villain. Who are we going to use? Well, let's use Galactus. In truth, Galactus and Thor go way back, and just in the realm of Marvel Comics, the origin of Galactus first appeared in the Thor comics. I want to say it was 161 and 162. The fact remains here that with regards to Galactus and Thor, their history is extremely rich. I mean, they fought side by side to defeat Ego the Living Planet. They've been enemies and they've been allies. And so because of this, Thor is well aware of how powerful Galactus is, but Thor is not without his own capabilities. Keep in mind, Thor is currently in possession of the Thor Force. Now, when it comes to the Asgardian mythos, and when it comes to Marvel Comics, the concept of the Odin Force, or the Thor Force, or whatever we want to call it, is simply just a source of power. It's not like it is a well. It's basically just the power he possesses. Now, with Odin, it's a little more straightforward. With Odin, his brothers had previously died alongside Odin, facing off against Surtur, which is kind of like this mortal enemy. It's the arch enemy of Odin, and he's actually the guy that killed Odin going into Ragnarok. But the fact remains here that the brothers of Odin basically died and their life force merged with him and gave him the Odin Force. And so it was really kind of Marvel's way to just explain, here's why Odin is so powerful. And so it's almost as if it was just kind of powers that were bestowed upon him. But again, it's still kind of murky. It's not really clear cut. There's no definitive explanation. Now, this is something that can be passed on from person to person. So it's almost like a power that he can remove from himself and give to somebody else. It's actually what happened during the events of Ragnarok. Thor basically spoke directly with the Odin Force. So it is an actual tangible source of energy that can exist outside of Odin. It's just with Odin all the time. And so whenever he uses it to its completion or uses any fraction of it, he has to go into the Odin sleep to basically recharge that power. But the fact remains here that Thor, with Odin having died somewhere along the line, Thor is now in possession of this force of energy. And so effectively, he now has the Thor Force. And this is insane because the Odin or Thor Force basically allows either one to do whatever it is that they want to do at any particular point in time, shy of warping reality on a universal scale. It basically just amplifies their existing powers in the extreme. The funny thing about this, though, is that as powerful as Thor is, he's not on the same level as Galactus. Because remember, Galactus is a force of nature. I mean, you're talking about a being with hitherto unrivaled power, with the exception of the highest ranking cosmic entities. And even then, they dare not try to destroy Galactus, because if Galactus were in a hungered state, let's say, for example, Galactus was basically ravenous, he was absolutely feeding, he was dying for something to eat, he could probably lay waste to a litany of different things. But if Galactus is completely full, if Galactus is totally charged with energy, if he were a battery and he's at 100%, I would dare say there's almost no one who could stand in his way, barring maybe Eternity himself, and even then, it would probably be a pretty formidable challenge. And so, because of that, Galactus is not someone to be trifled with here. Now, the cool thing is we get this really beautiful conversation between the two of them. And the idea here is that, Thor's question is, why are you going to consume this world? This world is half dead. I mean, it'll only ever give you really half the sustenance you need. It would be like eating a half-eaten sandwich. Why eat a half-eaten sandwich when you can go eat a whole sandwich, go to another planet that's rich with life, take that planet? There's no reason for you to take Earth. But for Galactus, it's more than just consuming a planet, right? Like, it's more than just saying, well, I'm hungry right now, I'm gonna go eat a planet. For Galactus, it's consuming Earth. Because remember, Galactus and Earth have a very close history. I mean, Galactus's first appearance, in Marvel Comics, came by way of the Silver Surfer arriving on Earth, telling the Fantastic Four, Galactus is coming and he's going to consume your planet and there's nothing you can do to stop him. And then, the Silver Surfer and the Fantastic Four banding together to defeat Galactus by way of using the Ultimate Nullifier, or at least threatening to use the Ultimate Nullifier. But time and time again, Galactus has shown up on Earth with the intention to conquer it. And time again, the Earth superheroes have basically stopped him. And so for Galactus, it's basically saying, I finally get the planet that I've been wanting to consume this entire time. It is not necessarily a life-rich planet. This planet is basically dying. But for me, it's really more of just the principle of the thing, and that's kind of the irony here, because what it does is it really shows how powerful Earth was in a lot of different ways. And that was something that had been touched on time and time again. I mean, Thanos has referenced that over and over again. The different alien races in Marvel Comics at some point along the line, the Shi'ar Empire, the Kree, the Skrulls, the Badoon, they've all talked about that time and time again. The Earth is home to some of the universe's most powerful beings, but the Earth is also filled with people who still live in a very primitive capacity, which is to say politics run the show and different things like that. And so the Earth was always viewed as a very dangerous place, because if one of the superheroes like Franklin Richards managed to lose control of his powers, he could wipe out everything in existence, to say nothing of people like the Molecule Man Owen Reese. So again, it's really kind of a cool scenario here with regards to the nature of the Earth and how it all functions. Now, of course, this leads into a direct conflict between Thor himself as well as Galactus. And so again, this is really kind of cool, because it's basically like this last stand. It's really Thor doing everything he can to try to keep this planet alive. The problem here is that as capable as Thor is, at the end of the day, he's no Odin. He's basically being toppled at every single turn. Now, in some ways, we could say this is Jason Aaron just nerfing the power of the Thor force, just sitting down and saying, okay, look, we're going to reduce this power, right? It's not nearly on the same level as Odin. And to a degree, that might be the case. I would say this is just Jason Aaron writing the story for the sake of writing a great story, which is exactly what he does. It's absolutely amazing. But in the middle of all this, Thor, again, going head to head against Galactus, is ultimately toppled and actually just kind of kicked off the planet and just sort of sent flying. Now again, this is cool, because despite the fact that Thor is not as powerful as Odin was, it's still an incredible fight. Galactus is relishing in this, right? I mean, when you're Galactus and you've been traveling around the universe for billions of years, and you show up on somebody's planet and they fire off their little weapons which tantamount to throwing toothpicks at a hurricane, you kind of get bored of the idea that no one can put up a real challenging fight. But then here you come to Earth, trying to conquer this planet that stood against you for so long, and then you find one god left with an insane amount of power, and you relish in the challenge. You're like, finally, I have something to keep me entertained. So it's really kind of a cool scenario. Of course, once Thor is basically kind of cast out of Earth, or cast out of Midgard and sent into the depths of space, it allows Galactus to begin going through and consuming the planet. Now again, the cool thing about this is that while all this is happening, we're suddenly met with the arrival of Thor's granddaughters. Now in my rundown video, and this is one of the funny things, it was like, hey guys, we're back from shopping. But this is one of the coolest moments in the story, because Thor's granddaughters are badass. But not only that, one of them looks like they're wielding Stormbreaker. Now, Stormbreaker, for those of you guys who don't know, is basically the hammer of Beta Ray Bill. And Beta Ray Bill, the reason why fans love him so much, and the reason why so many people are like, put him in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is because Beta Ray Bill is the first person to have ever picked up Thor's hammer. And it was a huge moment when it happened. Nick Fury contacts Thor, says, hey, look, there's a ship coming over here to Earth. Thor goes to investigate. Beta Ray Bill basically is part of his race, or at least is one of his, as his race's main protector, the protector of the Corbinites, comes across Thor, fights against him, and then picks up his hammer. It was mind-blowing. It was just like, oh my god, that's never happened before. And so it was a great big huge moment, and it set the stage for Marvel to begin introducing these moments here and there when someone other than Thor picked his hammer up. And it was always a really cool moment whenever it happened. But because of everything that had taken place, Odin had basically hosted a contest between Beta Ray Bill and Thor to determine who was the most worthy. And because of the fact that Beta Ray Bill Bill had proved himself to be an honorable warrior, because his conflict with Thor was not due to villainy, but because of the fact that he was a protector, Beta Ray Bill was given his own hammer fashioned by the dwarves at the request of Odin and was called Stormbreaker. And so again, it's a really, really cool moment. Of course, there's the axe of Jarnbjorn, there's the mace. I mean, there's all different kinds of little trinkets and so on. And it really kind of shows us that Thor really is the last of the gods. There are no other gods left in terms of the traditional pantheon. The cosmic entities still exist out there. But at the end of the day, the granddaughters of Thor, while they're not necessarily able to topple Galactus, and we wouldn't expect them to, they're able to put up a pretty significant fight. A lot more than we would expect. A much greater conflict than we would expect to see here. Now again, this is really kind of Jason Aaron delving into the idea that there are still really those individuals out there that are part of the Asgardian pantheon that do the best they can in terms of holding off various threats. But it's also the notion that the granddaughters of Thor follow very much in his footsteps. They're just as capable as he is in terms of straight up battles. And so of course, following this quick little skirmish between them, we end up jumping back to Thor himself and finding out that he effectively transitions to the furthest part, or ends up in the furthest part of the universe where Gorr the God Butcher had essentially been left, where he had been destroyed, with the Necrosword just sort of sitting out there in the middle of nowhere. And so what this does is it basically allows Thor to grab this sword, kind of harkening back to when he had absorbed the sword and when he had both hammers at the same time, and really just kind of realize this is basically the only way to take out Galactus, to basically use this sword that's designed to kill gods. Now, what this does is it basically gives us this little bit of information that tells us that the Necrosword was designed for a myriad of different purposes, that the sword is designed to kill gods, but is very much one of these weapons where its capabilities and its level of power is relative to whatever it's going against, or at least that seems to be the case. And so when Gorr the God Butcher is using it to kill gods, the weapon has enough power to kill gods. But when Thor is using the Necrosword, it amplifies his existing powers and allows him to take on Galactus. Now at this point, Galactus is in a pretty weakened state, and that's the other half of this equation. Galactus, whenever it is that he uses his power cosmic, it's just like a battery, right? It's not an infinite source of power. It's not like telepathy. It's not like the optic beams in Cyclops' eyes. It is a finite amount of power. It's not unlimited. And so as Galactus uses the power cosmic, it's like a battery that's just kind of slowly draining. Now, the other half of this is that the hungrier Galactus gets, the more desperate, the more ravenous, and the more dangerous he gets, the lower his patience get. And so if Galactus, for example, had showed up on Earth and was absolutely starving and this conflict had started, it never would have gone on this long. He would have just been like, and you're done now. And he would have just, obliterated Thor out of existence, killed his granddaughters when they showed up. This thing would have been 3 pages long, and then Galactus would have consumed the Earth, and that would have been it. But the fact that he's getting hungrier, the fact that he's using more of his powers, means that now he's beginning to get more irritated and he's beginning to get more desperate. Now, this is kind of the cool thing here, is because once Thor arrives back on the scene with this Necrosword, he absolutely decimates Galactus. I mean, he literally just kind of plunges the sword right through him, and that's really about it. Now, again, this is kind of a quick ending. I mean, it's not something grandiose. It's not something absolutely insane. Things come to an end quick, fast, and in a hurry. But it is this idea that with the Necrosword, Thor essentially has the power of 1,000 gods, and going through, kind of declaring himself Thor the Destroyer, fighting against Galactus, and basically taking Galactus down. What this does is it basically just kind of sends Galactus running. Sends him basically saying, okay, look, this battle is far more than it's worth. I mean, you're really more of a hassle than you're worth at this point. Now, this is also compounded by the fact that Galactus' physical form is absolutely tattered. I mean, it's almost in complete and total ruins just because of the fact that the battle's been so extreme. So again, at this point in this conflict, we're talking about a level of power that's so high up there that normal people couldn't even fathom what it is that's going on. But what it does is it also sits down and it says, even if Thor right now is not strong enough to go against Galactus, he will be. He will face off against Galactus somewhere along the line, and he will probably be successful in doing so. The other half of this is that following this skirmish, Thor actually bleeds onto the ground of Earth, and the Earth begins to just repopulate and regrow. Now, this is not just a random thing. This is not Jason Aaron just saying, yeah, man, like the blood of gods repopulates Earth. Thor also has the Thor Force, so he has the entire energy of Odin imbued to himself. The other half of this is that Freya is not the biological mother of Thor. The biological mother of Thor is Gaia, basically the physical manifestation of Mother Earth. And so because of that, Thor is basically taking the life energy of Gaia and just kind of throwing it out there on Earth. That's essentially what's happening. What this tells us is that somewhere along the line, the Earth will return to its normal self. I mean, the Earth will, just kind of regrow, and populace will begin to come back, and, humans will begin to grow, and so on and so forth. We don't know how long that process will take, but we know that it will. But with the Earth basically having been restored, the rivers and streams and so on and so forth, we actually end up picking up with this epilogue. And what we find out is that with this all-black Necrosword basically having been, attached to Galactus, that Galactus himself actually ends up just sort sort of evolving and kind of growing and imbuing himself with the Necrosword, and then simply goes forward as the Butcher of Worlds. The sad thing about this is we never find out what happens next. That's the worst part about all that, because I was like, I really want to see like Galactus, the Butcher of Worlds. Like, I really want to see that happen. I really want to see what ends up taking place here. But the problem is we don't. We never get to see that. We never actually get to see what takes place. Instead, Galactus is just kind of forced to consume Mars, and that's really about it. But in any event, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. But yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.